I used to work as a hotel receptionist, and I was accustomed to the late-night check-ins, the exhausted travelers, and the endless stream of guests. But one night, my ordinary routine took a terrifying turn that I would never forget. It was a slow evening, and I was handling the night shift alone. The clock had just struck midnight when a young couple entered the lobby. They appeared to be in their late 20s, and by all appearances, they seemed like any other guests. I greeted them with a polite smile and checked them into their room, offering the usual amenities and services. The couple was polite and seemed like typical travelers looking for a quiet place to rest. I handed them the key card, wished them a pleasant stay, and watched them head to their room. As the night continued, I focused on my work, making sure everything was running smoothly. Hours passed, and the hotel remained peaceful and undisturbed. But just after 2 a.m., as I was organizing paperwork behind the front desk, I heard the entrance chime ring. I looked up and saw the young man from the couple standing in the lobby. He had a strange, almost vacant expression on his face. I approached him, inquiring if there was anything he needed. His response was unsettling. He seemed disoriented and mumbled incoherently about being unable to find his room. I offered to help and asked for his room number. He stared at me for a moment, and his response sent shivers down my spine. "I'm not sure," he said, his voice trembling. I decided to keep my composure and remain professional. I offered to look up their room number and assist him. As I did, I couldn't help but notice how anxious and nervous he appeared. Eventually, I found their room number and directed him back to it. He hesitated for a moment, as if he wasn't entirely sure he should return to his room. It was an eerie moment of hesitation, but he eventually nodded and headed down the corridor. I watched him until he disappeared from sight, and then tried to shake off the sense of unease that had settled over me. I couldn't help but wonder what had caused such strange behavior in the guest. I went back to my work, but kept an eye on the security cameras, hoping to catch a glimpse of the man returning to his room. But he never did. The minutes turned into hours, and with the first light of dawn, I knew something was wrong. I decided to check on the room myself, unable to shake the feeling of dread that had settled in my stomach. When I arrived at the room, I hesitated for a moment. My training had prepared me for many scenarios, but I had never encountered anything like this before. I took a deep breath, and with trembling hands, I used my master key to unlock the door. The room was empty, the bed neatly made, and there was no sign of the young man, but the window was wide open, and it sent a shock of terror through me. I knew I had to report this to the authorities. The police were called, and an investigation began. The room held no clues to the man's whereabouts, and it became a mystery that both bewildered and horrified me. Weeks later, the investigation took a chilling turn. It was discovered that the young couple had checked in under a false identity. Their credit card was stolen, and the man's identification had been forged. The realization sent shivers down my spine. What had this man been running from? And who was he really? The questions haunted me, and the encounter in the dead of night left me with a chilling sense of unease. I could never shake the feeling that I had crossed paths with something dangerous that night, something that still lurked in the shadows, and that realization left me with a permanent sense of dread.
I'd bought an old hotel that had been closed for 2 decades. My vision was to convert it into luxury apartments, a project that I believed held great potential. Excitement and anticipation coursed through me as I headed to the property, ready for the first survey with a team of professionals. We arrived at the hotel one evening, just as the sun was dipping below the horizon. The place was a relic of the past, the grandeur of its architecture shrouded in neglect. As we entered, our flashlights pierced the darkness, revealing the forgotten beauty of the place. The surveyors, a group of seasoned professionals, began their work. We explored the ground floor, making notes of the areas that needed the most attention for the renovations. The creaking of floorboards and the distant scuttling of unseen creatures lent an eerie ambience to the whole endeavor, but I pushed aside my unease. However, as we made our way to the upper floors, our journey took an unsettling turn. On the second floor, we discovered mattress beds, tattered blankets, and discarded food wrappers. My initial thought was that it was squatters, but as we ventured further, our unease grew. On the fourth floor, we found evidence that this wasn't just a temporary hideout for squatters, but something more sinister. The walls were adorned with strange, cryptic symbols and graffiti. My heart pounded, and I couldn't dismiss the sense of foreboding that was quickly enveloping me. Then we heard them, a faint rustling in the darkened hallway. The surveyors and I tensed, our flashlights dancing wildly as we scanned the shadows. Out of the darkness, a disheveled figure emerged. The man, clad in ragged clothes, was gaunt and unshaven, his eyes sunken and vacant. But it was the gun he clutched in trembling hands that sent our fear into overdrive. The squatters were not your typical homeless individuals looking for shelter. They were something else, something far more dangerous. We were intruders in their domain, and they seemed prepared to protect it at any cost. The leader of the surveyors, a no-nonsense professional, spoke to the armed man in a calm and reassuring tone. He explained our purpose, hoping to defuse the situation. But the man's wild eyes showed no sign of comprehension. My heart raced as I watched the confrontation unfold. The man's finger twitched on the trigger, and the situation teetered on a precipice. My mind raced, contemplating escape routes and praying that this wouldn't end in violence. Suddenly, a door to our left swung open, revealing another squatter, this one wielding a rusty knife. The tension escalated as more figures emerged from the shadows, each carrying makeshift weapons. Our presence had disrupted the fragile balance they'd established in this long-abandoned place. In that dire moment, the surveyors managed to convince the armed man to lower his weapon. It was a small victory, but one that allowed us to escape the hotel. We quickly descended the creaky staircase, my fear urging me to run, but the need for caution keeping me moving at a controlled pace. Once we were back in the safety of the evening air, I let out a breath I didn't know I'd been holding. We called the authorities, reporting the squatters, and leaving the resolution of the situation in their capable hands. As I stood in the darkened street, looking back at the looming silhouette of the hotel, I realized that my dream of turning it into luxury apartments had encountered an unforeseen and unsettling reality.
It was an ordinary evening, and I was at home winding down after a long day of work. As a boiler repairman, my job was pretty routine. So when I received a call from a small hotel about a boiler malfunction, I thought it would be just another job. They urgently needed someone to fix it, and I agreed to help, hoping to get it sorted quickly and head home to my family. When I arrived at the hotel, it was far from the glamorous image you might associate with such places. It was a small, run-down establishment that had seen better days. The manager, an elderly man, greeted me and explained that the boiler was located in the basement. He seemed anxious, and his hands trembled as he handed me the rusty iron key to the basement door. Carrying my toolbox, I descended the creaky stairs into the dimly lit basement. The air was heavy with a musty smell, and I could hear the soft hum of a malfunctioning boiler in the distance. As I approached it, I noticed a dark, splotchy trail leading away from the machine. Something had leaked or spilled around it. My initial thought was that it was a plumbing issue, but as I got closer, I realized this was far from normal. The trail didn't seem to be water, it was much thicker. I knelt down to get a closer look and discovered it was a trail of blood, fresh and still slightly warm. My heart began to race as my eyes followed the trail further into the darkness. The trail of blood led me to a gruesome sight. There, in the dim light, lay a lifeless body. Panic surged through me, and I stumbled back, nearly falling over. My mind raced as I tried to process what I had stumbled upon. The body, which appeared to be that of a young woman, lay in a pool of crimson, her lifeless eyes staring up at the ceiling. In shock, I fumbled for my phone to call the police. As I waited for them to arrive, I couldn't help but glance around the basement. My heart pounded and my mind raced, wondering if the killer was still working in the shadows. Fear and dread wrapped themselves around me like a vice, and every creak, every distant sound sent shivers down my spine. The police arrived soon after, and I recounted what had transpired. They began their investigation, and I was questioned extensively. I told them I had no knowledge of how the woman ended up there. The authorities seemed to believe me, but their suspicions still hung in the air. The days that followed were filled with anxiety and dread. The hotel was shut down, and the investigation into the woman's death continued. Rumors about the murder in the basement swirled throughout the town. It was a chilling experience knowing that I had unwittingly stumbled upon a crime scene while simply trying to do my job. In the end, the police concluded that I had no involvement in the woman's death, and her murder remained unsolved. But that encounter in the hotel's basement haunted my nights, and I could never shake the eerie feeling that I had been in the presence of something truly horrifying.